right, it's 4:40. Welcome to the session. I'm Martin, the Chief Data Officer of Project A, and I have the pleasure to introduce James, who is a data analytics lead at N26 here in Berlin. And yeah, he's going to talk about clustering today. So if the talk going to roughly take 15 minutes, and afterwards we have 5 minutes time for questions here, and then after that 20 minutes in Wonder. If you have questions, please bring them up already in the chat. Yeah, and I'd like to hand over to you, James. Thanks for being here.
Great. Wow, 80 people, amazing. Cool, thanks so much for taking the time, everyone. Just going to present some slides now. Hopefully you guys can see them. As Martin said, I'm James. I'm leading product analytics at N26 right now, and I wanted to speak today a little bit about some of the great work we've been doing around user clusters. If I can share this screen, hopefully it works. Amazing. So I wanted to share a bit the journey we've been on around this topic, because I know it's something that a lot of people speak about doing, but maybe never get to because they have other priorities, and maybe they don't know exactly what the impact will be at the end. So I'll speak a bit about the kind of problems we were trying to address, why we actually decided to do this in the first place, what were the main business reasons behind it. I'll talk a little bit about what we actually ended up doing, some of the things we tried and failed at, of course, and then I'll go on to maybe speak a bit about like why it was useful, what the actual impact was on the business. And also for those of you who maybe don't know, N26 is a digital bank, essentially where you can sign up online in 10 minutes, get access to a free bank account with all the great features. It's super easy, a great user experience, and it's currently in about 25 different markets, and we've got about 5 million customers right now. So for those of you who haven't heard of the product. So I'll skip right into it. I know I don't have much time, so let's crack on. If I can skip, amazing. So the first part is a bit of a bleak slide, so the curse of success. So what do I mean by this, and how does it relate to clustering? So like most businesses, N26, when it started in 2015, was it had a kind of a germ of an idea to create a great digital banking experience, and it sort of built up a very core early adopter user base who are very similar, actually based in Germany and Austria mainly around family and friends. It grew nice and organically before, it started really taking off. And at that stage, N26 managed to get its own banking license. It then quickly expanded across the whole of Europe. So from kind of signing up tens of users a day to suddenly scaling up and thousands of users every day across the whole of Europe. We start rapidly scaling the team, and we go into this hyper-growth phase. I'm sure many of you are kind of familiar with this, and a lot of talks about it over the last few weeks. The last sessions today. And we also start scaling the team, rolling out more and more products. And until we get to today, when we have around 5 million customers across 25 markets, doing huge amounts of transaction volume, 1,500 employees. And we start to hit this sort of existential wall where people start to ask questions around, well, the customers we thought we were serving at the start, we kind of had a good idea who they were. But now we're across the whole of Europe. We're onboarding a lot of customers who look probably quite different from the people who were coming in at the start. Maybe people who aren't familiar with digital banking are using us differently. They're using many more products now as well. So really, do we actually still understand who our customers are? And kind of people were started whispering these kinds of questions before really they started shouting them, what actually are our customers doing? Who are they exactly? And this is really key for anyone who's building kind of digital product, right? You really want to get under the skin of the customer so you can make great decisions and serve their needs. So if these kind of existential questions are coming up because you've been growing just so quickly, how can you best address that? So I think there were kind of four main things that I want to touch on here. You might be saying well, weren't you looking at any data through that whole period? How can you say you weren't understanding who your customers are? And I think what people do when they're going through that hypergrowth phase, quite rightly, is really focus on core business metrics, right? You want to get your BI right. You want to understand what's going on a broad basis. Because you're growing so fast, you want to keep on top of those numbers. But often those aggregate measures don't really tell you the full story, right? You've maybe got 2 or 3 main dashboards you're looking at every day, but really underneath your number for, average transaction volume, you've got a huge different distribution of what users are actually doing, right? You've got people, probably like some kind of whale users down kind of far right of the distribution who are really using you a lot, and then maybe a kind of bulk of people around the kind of median, right? You have these huge skewed distributions, and those aggregate measures maybe aren't the best way to see what's actually happening on a user level. We also had a problem where there was no real kind of common understanding of our user behavior across the business. So we grew very quickly, lots of different teams being spun up, specializing in one key area of the product. Let's say they're focusing on our cards. Let's say they're focusing on our KYC process. But there was no way to bring and thread all those things into one coherent story, especially when things flow up towards management. They're getting a lot of different specialized knowledge, but maybe not a way to understand the whole thing. The third thing I think is typical as well of companies which are growing this fast. When you're early on, you're really working off like hypotheses, and you're really willing to kind of go with your gut, roll something out and see if it sticks. But I think once you scale to a much bigger size, you kind of need to take stock that you can't continually run on these kind of hunches when you have the ability to do better research and understand exactly who those groups are. So people have hunches around the kind of customers that you're serving, but maybe you've never assessed them fully and maybe actually never know the size of those groups, for example. And the last one, I think, is a problem that, a lot of people face in these kind of digital products. You just have a lot of data on your users, right? For us, we have lots of stuff about transactions, how you're using the app, how you're contacting customer service, lots of demographic information. So how can I synthesize all that information, reduce the complexity, and actually be able to discuss our users in a very coherent and easy way? Also, for people who aren't very data literate, how can I simplify this and actually provide kind of a tangible way for people to discuss users that's also based in data? So we decided to embark on this journey of creating these user clusters to kind of address these key challenges here. So trying really, the key thing here is to create clusters which the business can understand, and they can also then use in actionable ways, which I'll talk about later. Pardon me. So we want to create some user clusters. So what now? So I've labeled this slide the 6 easy steps with a colon. Of course, this process wasn't actually very easy, was actually fairly challenging, and we've had a lot of different iterations, which I'll be happy to speak about later. But I want to emphasize the kind of 2 or 3 main things on this process, which looks like a typical kind of analytics or machine learning pipeline, let's say. So the first one I think is so important, and what we realized maybe a bit too late was you want to define a really clear scope for this kind of work. And the kind of data you want to analyze in terms of user behavior should really focus on like the core value of your product. So for us, all we put into this clustering algorithm was around user transaction behavior. We left out anything which was to do with demographics, to do with, these immutable features of customers. Because what we realized was we wanted like pure clusters around behavior. And then at the end, in that 6th and last step, once we have our results, we can see how those behavioral clusters actually lie across these things like markets and age ranges and gender. We're not biasing our clusters by putting those in at the start. We actually just want to see, given behavior, how does that fall across our different markets? And that was like a really key thing we kind of came to understand through this process. The other thing as well is in this kind of red section in the middle, when you're actually kind of building, is to keep it really, really simple. There's no need to go for some huge cloud-based end-to-end ML solution here, when really our goal here was kind of to create something that's interpretable by the business. We're not building a fraud detection algorithm. We're building a kind of descriptive clusters which will help people understand our users. So we're happy to use samples here. We're happy to iterate very quickly. And once we get to step number 5, it's really all about making sure that we can actually describe the results in a coherent way to the business and they'll understand them. Cool. So I'll skip through quickly what we actually found then. So we actually found 10 main user clusters. And what was really nice is that they kind of fell out over kind of 3 broad activity bands, which for anyone who's kind of doing product analytics, they kind of like to see this kind of stuff because it reminds us of kind of, power user curves, let's say, where we we have our high activity customers who are generating a lot of value for the product. And then we have all the way down to low activity who maybe we want to have some different strategies around to retain them. And what was really nice about our results were that we saw some of the kind of preconceived notions of what people thought people were doing with the product actually came out in the results. So in our high activity cluster, for example, we had a really strong group of primary account users. So people who were putting their salary in, people who were using direct debit, standing orders, and that came out really, really strongly in the data, and we were actually able to quantify that for the first time. On a different note, we also had this kind of moderate activity customers, which we'd also kind of hypothesized existed, particularly around like a travel use case. So, I get N26 because I want to go on holiday. I want to just kind of have a separate spending card because I know that I can spend in different currencies. And that also came out really nicely in the data to say, yeah, you have these people who use it for short bursts, and they use you mainly for kind of foreign spending transactions. So it was really nice. The results were clear and they were easily communicated to the business and they proved and disproved a lot of kind of fallacies and things that people were thinking about our customers at the time. So that's all well and good, but actually what was the impact? Because clusters can be nice, but what did you actually do with them? So the first point here is maybe a little bit cheesy, but honestly, I think one of the main benefits we've seen after kind of rolling this out to the whole business is for the first time, people from different teams, from marketing, from product to the management, can really kind of start to talk about users in the same way, right? There's this kind of cast of 10 characters that are very tangible. People understand the kind of features associated with each, and they can actually start to have conversations around, how do we target primary account customers? I know how many there are, I know what markets they're in. What are we doing around that? Or what are we doing around travel users? And people are actually now having a great framework in which to discuss these more strategic questions. And that's been a huge benefit for us. The second one is maybe a little bit more selfish around kind of what we're interested in analytics, right? So it provides this really powerful new analytical lens where now we have, clusters associated with users. I can throw this over lots of different analyses for a really interesting take on whatever topic I'm looking at in product analytics across our whole product suite. And I think that here's a kind of interesting example that we found earlier this year. So obviously, I think when COVID hit, we were a bit worried about our international travel group, right? So we're thinking they're not going to be spending with N26 anymore. What kind of use case are these people going to have with us? And what we actually saw was, as you can see, this purple line of their spend internationally went down and plummeted when the COVID lockdowns hit. What was really great is that we could, for the first time, tease out from this very particular group of customers that actually they pivoted towards domestic spend. So we could go back to the marketing team, to the finance team who were planning kind of what our continuity strategy would be for COVID and say, actually, the people who we think we're losing to travel, actually, we may not lose all of them, right? We can see they're pivoting now to domestic spend. They have a different use case and we've kind of hooked them in with something else. So a great way to feed back to the business when you have maybe crises like this, you can quickly throw over your clusters and look at how it's affecting different user groups. And the third kind of slightly more fancy thing we're moving towards now is being able to kind of understand and predict different user journeys. So we're kind of at the moment building out clusters for early activity. So maybe after 1 month or so, like what are the main groups of users we have there? And then after 12 months, how are users looking? And we can track, the different clusters as they are early on to which mature cluster they end up in. So are they starting off as maybe a travel user and pivoting towards a kind of primary account use case? Or are they an early kind of low use case who then pivot into a high activity case? And by studying those different user journeys, we can start to try and predict where customers might end up and what kind of behavior we get from each customer group. And it also means for the first time in hopefully a couple of months, we'll be doing much more targeted intervention strategies on certain groups of customers we want to nudge into kind of different activity groups when they're more mature customers. So that's actually all I had. But I hope that was useful, a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I think I managed to finish it in time, but would love to hear any questions that people had around the topic.
Thanks, James. So perfect timing. Let's give a round of applause. I mean, only I can applaud here. Thanks a lot. For those who have questions like Adrian or Steven, you can click the grab the mic button somewhere at the top right. and then you can come here. Okay, then I have a question first. So how do you keep the cluster stable, and how do you consistently track your customers across clusters?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think it's something that maybe I'll just stop sharing my screen now. Something that we're kind of coming to now is exactly this question of how do you make sure that you have clusters which are up to date with your latest user information, but also which don't change so often that the business gets confused, right? I don't want to have new clusters every week and change the categorization. So what I think we've landed on here is a cadence of sort of like changing it maybe every quarter or every 6 months, and then going back and reclassifying users. Obviously keeping the old results in mind, and also kind of tracking.
So basically you make it sticky and then recluster every few months.
Exactly.
And then you can have nice flow charts.
And then we're like doing a kind of an analysis to say, by the way, here are the groups of customers that have shifted around groups, so people can start to understand it. Oh, amazing! Someone's grabbed the mic.
Yeah, please do so.
Hi.
Hey. You need to unmute. Okay. Hey.
So I'm Simon. I don't know. I just see a black screen, but do you hear my voice?
We can hear you.
Okay. So thanks for the insights. Was very inspirational, but I have an additional question. Could you tell maybe one anecdotal story of how you use these insights to actually improve a feature or change something in the product, and then see in the metrics what happened? Because now it seems you could actually measure what you suspected by common sense logic, but was there anything how you could prove or show to business owners that product change really paid off?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So at the moment, we're actually starting for the first time to do these kinds of like very targeted interventions. So I'll come back to you exactly when we can say we move the needle on this particular group. So I don't have a great first example of how we targeted one particular group and how we saw things move, but certainly we've used it more reactively, like I was describing, in terms of like how do certain external events affect our users in different groups. But really that part you're saying is exactly what we want to get to.
Yeah.
Around, we now have a user cluster for every customer at different stages, and we're actually building features for those people now, but we're not exactly there yet. So hopefully in 3 to 6 months, I'll come back with an amazing example.
That would be great, but it also means you cannot change these clusters every 6 months or so, except you're super fast in building very impactful features. Maybe then you could.
Yeah, I mean,
okay, thanks a lot.
Okay,
thank you.
Question, Stephen? Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Thanks.
Hey.
Thanks from my side too. So I was wondering, I mean, probably you can't give away all the secret sauce, but is there kind of a high-level overview you can give us on the types of features that went into the algorithms?
Yeah. So as I was mentioning, we actually ended up focusing mostly on transaction behavior of our customers. And the first clustering we ran was on this like mature clusters, so after 12 months. So it was really, I would say, almost quite basic features around for each of our transaction types, how many were users doing, how often were they doing them, and like exactly the frequency and amount of different types. Also, a little bit of like aggregate features around how active in general these customers were, how often they maybe like were elapsed, how many weeks in the year they were active. Those kinds of features we also managed to throw in, which gave us that nice stratification by activity group as well in our final result. But really, like, there was nothing super magical about what we ended up using. In fact, we found that the more simple that we kept it, the more interpretable our results were. So we actually started throwing in like in-app behavior, all this other stuff, but we ended up taking it out because it kind of muddied the waters a little bit for us.
Cool. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So time is up. I just posted a link to the Wonder Space. So basically you go there and Stephen goes there as well. And then we meet in the middle between the 4 spaces. And then you get to ask all the other questions. Thanks again, Stephen, for doing this, and see you in the lounge.